There's something warm and soothing about that first sip of coffee. It's partly because that cup is beautifully warm to drink, and it's partly because your body is happy to drink any liquid after a 7, 8, hopefully a 9-hour hiatus. But mostly it's because you're finally getting that hit of caffeine that you desperately need to function like a contributing member of society. In today's episode, I want to talk about how caffeine has shaped us as a civilization in terms of our productivity and how it's really changed the way we operate over the last couple of hundred years. Back in around 1650, caffeine entered the Western world that probably a lot of you that are watching this are living in today. Clean water was scarce back in these times. People were drinking out of rivers and creeks. Disinfecting water and things like that, and even boiling it, wasn't really something that people did. However, us humans, being pretty smart humans, figured out that if we ferment a drink, we make it safe to drink. During the fermentation process, alcohol is developed, and that kills all of the other bacteria that would otherwise make us sick. Even kids, back in these days, kids would have a drink served to them at the breakfast table. I read about hard cider being served to kids, and it kind of makes sense when you think about it like that. If you were a parent and you had a couple of children and you wanted to quench their thirst like you'd need to, would you give them something that's potentially going to make them sick that you don't currently have a way of disinfecting and making clean? Or would you just give them something that's a little bit alcoholic, but you don't really understand what alcohol really means? But your kids don't get sick. I know if I was them, I would give them the thing that doesn't make them sick. And I mean, think about the sorts of things that people are doing in the 1650s, right? Most men are probably out there trying to just live off the land, growing crops and doing all that sort of stuff. To do those activities, it doesn't really matter if you have a bit of a buzz, really. I mean, I mow the lawns and have a beer. It's not all that complicated. Things, however, started to change as history progressed. Before I move along there, let's just skip over to another part of the world. In about the 1200s, the Arabs discovered caffeine, coffee, tea, chocolates, and things like that. They were said to have gone through this kind of golden era around then, where they built upon Greek mathematics that had already been developed and sort of figured out a whole bunch of new things in this sort of new caffeinated world that they discovered. They instituted the sort of decimal point system. They figured out spherical trigonometry, the basics of algebra and things like that. They were the first people who really started getting into all this sort of stuff. The Age of Reason in England and other parts in that sort of the world were all around this time where caffeine was slowly starting to get introduced. And I mean, think about that for a second. They had discovered this drug that basically fosters this kind of linear, focused, rational way of thinking. Nothing else at the time really was available to do that, and that really allowed that part of the world to thrive. And after that part of the world did thrive, it started to spread across. We move into the 1600s where it comes across into much more of Europe, the United Kingdom, and then across the rest of the Western world. In about the late 1700s, early 1800s, people were drinking coffee everywhere. Coffee and tea, I should say. Chocolate was also starting to sort of come around. During that time, people that were drinking a lot of this were starting to come up with different ideas. Particularly the engineers at the time started to come up with these pretty complicated machines and things that they would design and get built. As these complicated machines that made our lives easier back in that day started to get built, well, they needed people to operate them, didn't they? They didn't have robots back then. They needed humans to control these. And if you were some sort of engineer, or if you owned a company that was making these machines, who would you be selling it to? The village drunk, or somebody who's drinking coffee, who can concentrate and not make many mistakes and potentially not hurt people? You can see the answer to this. Now, as this sort of started to sort of get onto a roll-on effect, engineers at the time, they started developing more and more machines. They needed more and more people that could run these machines. These companies started to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and all of a sudden we're sort of getting into that industrial revolution era. So am I sort of attributing the industrial revolution to the drinking of caffeine? Well, I think there has to be some sort of truth to it. I mean, if you look at history, the times really line themselves up. If you take a deeper look near the start, when all this is happening and these companies are getting bigger and bigger, owners of companies and CEOs are trying to extract the most efficient way possible to manufacture or produce whatever goods or services they're trying to do. At the time, they didn't really have breaks. People were kind of working all the time. So they started surveying people. And the biggest response they got was, give us a coffee break. And this sort of started this new trend, and all these companies were institutionalizing a coffee break within their own company. People were making less mistakes, people were getting hurt less often, people were able to work later. Eventually people were working overnight, and you couldn't do that with alcohol. Like, you can't have 6 beers and stay up all night and work. You can, however, do that if you have some caffeine. Think about that for a second. Your employer is encouraging you to stop being productive for them, to take this drug that they're encouraging and giving to you for free so that they can extract more value out of you. I don't know. When you think of it like that, it just sounds a little bit crazy. Let me know in the comments if you think the same as me. You don't really think about it like that, because especially for anyone who's my age, or even, our parents or grandparents, everyone drank coffee and tea. That was just completely normal. But back then they just didn't have this. People were suggesting, let's have a coffee break, because they couldn't afford it. This was a luxury. And all of a sudden these CEOs and company bosses have just figured out this way that to just extract so much more value out of people, and for longer. So coffee and tea and caffeine has played this huge part in just the explosion of productivity globally. I mean, which country do you know of right now that where people are from that they don't drink any caffeinated beverage? They don't drink any coffee or any tea. Yes, some people don't drink it, and that's fair enough. Across the world, some people do, but so many people do across the world. I surveyed 40 odd friends of mine. 90% of them drank a caffeinated beverage, at least one every day. Now, that's okay, right? Because it helps us be more productive, right? It helps us do all these things. Well, if you've watched one of my other videos, which I'll link up a card here or here, I can't remember which side, it's about sleep and how it interacts with your sleep. Caffeine takes quite a while to get out of your system, so it can really interrupt your sleep. There's also some evidence to say that, especially if you have a condition, a heart condition or something like that, having a lot of caffeine can accelerate you to get to a place where you're going to have some issues with that. I'm not a doctor. I'm not here to say any of that. In fact, I just want that to be known whenever I'm making these videos. I'm just trying to talk about the things that I know. And the things that I know are that, yes, coffee and caffeine makes us more productive. Yes, it allows us to focus for longer. But us as a civilization, as everybody on this planet on Earth, has really only been drinking coffee for a few hundred years. I want you to just sort of let that sink in. Most people are relying on a beverage that they're drinking every day to get them through their day, that us as a population have only been drinking for a couple of hundred years. I think that's something to think about, and I think I'm going to end on that note. If you like this video, give it a like, hit the subscribe button if you already haven't, and let me know if you have any ideas for me to sort of talk about. Content that I'm bringing here is just to make you kind of think. I don't ever want to be the type of person to say, hey, this is what you should do. This is what I'm bringing you the information, and you can make your own decision. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.